Hello and welcome. I'm Bella for cgmechanics.com. Right now, I'm working on this scene on the side. The project is far from complete, but I thought I'd give you a sneak peek and fulfill my promise of a modeling exercise. So, we're going to build this sun terrace. The unique thing about this exercise is that we'll use a single seamless texture for the wood and design the material so that it looks different every time it's reproduced. Let's get started. Here's a quick look at the scene as it appears in the live view, without the grass, of course. Rendering grass in live view would be too taxing on my computer. Now, we'll recreate the sun terrace in a new Blender scene. I've already recreated a small part of the scene, and now we'll start with the first wooden plank. I'll add a cube, go into edit mode, and scale it on the Shift-Z axis. First roughly, then make it flatter using Z again. Let's scale it on the X-axis. Next, we'll round off the corners. Control, Shift, Alt, and click to select all the outer edges in the loop. Bevel it to make it look rounded. Then select this loop, followed by the one at the back. Right-click, mark seams, so that the outer surfaces are cut and the texture can be applied more easily. Right-click again, choose Shade Smooth. Now let's add the material. I'll use a texture set from my asset browser. I'll use a special texture pack, and I'll put the link for it in the video description. The person who made this pack doesn't make textures anymore, but they're great. They're made using photogrammetry, top-notch stuff. I will take the wood texture. Now let's look at the shader. Unwrap it by pressing A, then U, and choose Unwrap. The texture looks good so far. Maybe we can scale it down a bit. Now, let's prepare the texture further. Currently, if we duplicate this plank, it will look exactly the same, which we don't want. There are several tricks for this. The first is to randomize the UV coordinates every time we duplicate the plank. We can do this by adding an Object Info node from the Input menu in the editor. It has a random output, which we'll use for the texture's location. I usually add a Math node set to multiply to increase the random value. Then, I use a Combine XYZ node to control the X and Y shifts separately. To make it more random, I use some math operations on the Y value. Now, every time we duplicate the plank, it will have a slightly different texture position. Let's duplicate it a few times to build the first layer, and then we can refine the material further. Duplicate the plank using Alt and D. To redo this operation, press Shift and R. That's fine for now. What we have now is different texture coordinates, but the color is still pretty much the same. So, we're going to tackle the color here by adding a color, hue, saturation, value node. Now, I want to influence the saturation and brightness values. The Object Info node's random output always ranges between 0 and 1. For the value node, if we set it to 0, it will make everything very dark. So, we need to adjust this random value between 0 and 1 to, let's say, between 0.8 and 1. For that, we can use the Map Range node. We feed our random value into the input of the Map Range node and map it from 0 to 1 to 0.8 to 1. Let's plug that into the value. Okay, we can make it a bit more extreme. Around here should work. Then we can adjust the saturation. For that, I would just copy this node with Ctrl-Shift-D to keep one input. You can hold Shift and drag with the right mouse button to link them. Then we send this into the saturation value. This might be a bit too strong. We could even increase the saturation a bit and also raise the minimum range and maybe even make it a bit brighter. For that, let's raise both values in the value node a bit more. Another thing you can do is overlay a noise texture, and we could multiply that with the color. Let's do that. We add a texture, noise texture. For the vector, we'll take it from the object texture coordinates. Then we add a vector, mapping node. To influence the location, we'll use this multiplied high value. For the noise texture, I don't have high demands. It will only slightly come through. We can then multiply it over afterward. So we need a mix color, and then the noise texture should be multiplied over it. Let's take a quick look at the noise texture. I'll reduce the scaling a bit and maybe increase the level of detail and the roughness. Okay, let's look at the result. We can set the strength of the effect. I'd probably set it around here. Ultimately, the look will change a bit in cycles, so we'll have to fine-tune it later. Okay, let's continue modeling. I want to extend this area a bit. For that, we'll use a tool we rarely use. Activate correct face attributes in the options, and now we can easily extend this area. This is extremely useful for tasks like this, especially when we'll modify the wood later. Turn it off again so you don't forget. Next, we'll work on the stairs. I'll take a plank and duplicate it using Alt-D. As long as I don't want to change the geometry of the plank, I'll keep using Alt-D. Rotate it 90 degrees on the x-axis and place it under here. Then duplicate these planks using Alt-D. Now let's take another plank. Alt-D, rotate x 90 degrees, rotate z 90 degrees. This one seems a bit smaller than the stairs I made, but the principle remains the same. In this case, the plank is too long, and we can't edit it in edit mode because that would affect all the planks. So place the cursor using Shift+right-click, then right-click, set origin to 3D cursor. This changes the position off to the other planks as well. Every plank shares the same origin point. Adjust it a bit more, and now we can scale it on the y-axis without affecting the other planks. Anything done in object mode won't affect the other planks, only in edit mode. Okay, let's duplicate these planks using Alt+D. This is where the house will start. Next, as I said, the stairs. Select the wood, Alt+D, duplicate on Z, rotate Y 90, maybe scale it a bit in width using S and X. Now we can take both, Alt+D again, Shift+Y. This is enough for me. I'd like to scale these down a bit. So take this plank, Alt+D, Shift+Y, and place it here. Then again, Alt+D, Shift+Y, and move it down. For simplicity, move this down, we can scale it in a bit. Then Alt+D, Shift+R. These two planks, Alt+D on X. Okay, now I'll place a cube here. This will be our Boolean object. Let me adjust the dimensions a bit. Then go to Object Settings under Viewport Display as Bounds. Now, we take this plank and add a Boolean modifier. We want a difference operation with this cube. Now, the plank is cut, and we can select all the planks we need to cut. Finally, select the plank with our modifier, then Ctrl+L and choose Copy Modifiers. Now this is all set. It's sticking out a bit at the bottom, so we could take the cube and pull it down a bit. Then finish it off, Alt+D on X, rotate Y 90 degrees. Place it here, and maybe scale it a bit on Z. Originally, the plank was a bit narrower. Now, we can place an empty in the middle, a bit higher maybe, and mirror these planks to the other side. These are exactly the planks we want. We'll add a mirror modifier, using the empty as the mirror center. We need to check which axis it works on. Probably Y. If both disappear when using bisect, we know we need to flip the direction. Now, by moving the empty, we can influence where our mirrored object should be. Now, we can adjust everything. I'm not quite sure if I like this, so I'll move the cube in a bit more. Yes, I think I'll go with this. Then, Alt plus D on Z. Maybe move the planks in a bit more. Then select these planks again, lastly the one with the mirror modifier. Then Ctrl plus L, copy modifiers. Now, we have it on the other side. One plank is missing, so we'll add that. Now, everything is in place on the other side. These planks need to move over a bit more, so I'll simply scale them on Y, and then it's done. Next, we'll add the railing. For that, we'll add a cube, scale it using the S key, Shift plus Z. I made it more to scale in my work, but for this tutorial, I'll do it without scale. Let's do it like this. Then unwrap it again. For that, we'll have to distribute seams again. I'll go into transparent view, select the bottom face, delete it with X face. Up here, edge selection. These edges are now selected, and I'll just take an inner edge, select it, U unwrap, so we can apply a texture again. I'll go in and select the appropriate material. In my case, it's wood. Let's see if it fits. It's a bit skewed, which means it was probably unwrapped incorrectly. This has been happening more frequently lately. So, go into the UV editor, then Edit Mode, select all, and it still doesn't look good because I probably forgot to unwrap it. U mark seams. Apparently, I did something wrong there. U unwrap. Now, we have it. Lately, I've noticed that the unwrapping often ends up at a 45-degree angle, slightly skewed. I have no idea why that happens, but you can always manually correct it. So, this looks good to me. I would say that the top needs to be rounded off. Select the face, turn off transparent view, and then bevel it. Right-click, choose Shade Smooth. Now we can use this object. Translate it over here. You can also use a modifier for this. In this case, we could use our empty object. First, add a mirror modifier to our wooden beam. Then go to Object and choose the empty. Select the correct axis, then select the other wooden beam. Hit Ctrl L and copy modifiers. Great. Duplicate this one with Alt-D and place it at the bottom. Next, we'll add some sort of railing around it. For that, I'll add a cube. Scale it down to about this size. Scaling is a matter of personal preference. Some people find it strange, but everyone has their own idea of what looks good. Now, I'd like to use some shearing. There's a function for that. Let me know how long it's been in Blender. I can't imagine it's been there for long. If we select it, we can shear the object like this. It's a function that many have wanted in Blender for a long time. I only recently discovered it, and yes, it's quite exciting. Duplicate this with Shift plus Y, place it here, and then extrude it down. I like this slope. I could leave it like this, but I won't. Go into Edge Selection. Select this bottom edge, press GG, hold Alt, and try to straighten it a bit. Round off the corners here and there. Then we need to unwrap it again. I'll try with A, U, and then Smart UV Project. Let's see if the result looks good. Apply our material, and I actually like it. By the way, I could use another mirror modifier here, but if I don't want the material to look the same on both sides, I'll just use Alt plus D. That way, it becomes a separate object with new texture coordinates, and it looks completely different. For the top part, we could take a plank like this and copy it with Shift plus D, because we want to change the geometry. Rotate it on Y by 90 degrees, scale it on X and Z. Adjust it a bit on Z. Perfect, and it's done. I had a roof on my sun terrace. Let's take a look at that. The good thing is, Since we're using mirror modifiers and these two have the same geometry, it's enough to edit one and extend it upwards accordingly. Ups. This was also copied with Alt and D. Go into the Object Data Properties. Normally, the name of the currently selected object is displayed here. But since it shares geometry with an original object, another name is displayed here. We simply press the 3, just like we would create an independent material, we've now created independent geometry. Now we can select one and extend it upwards. I'd say this looks about right. Next, we'll make beams. Add a cylinder here. Scale it with Shift+Z. Select the face, extend it upwards, and unwrap it right away. I've selected the top face, add that face. Then edge selection and select one of the inner edges. Mark seams. Let's see if I get it right this time. I'll unwrap it right away. And now I'll use a mirror modifier again. Choose the empty as the mirror object. Check on the x-axis to see if we have the correct side. Now the empty can be moved a bit to the right so that everything looks the same. Good. Then we go in here and rotate it once on X, then rotate it on Z, and set it up from the top view. That looks great. Let's see where the post is. Let's go a bit over it. Since the 3D cursor is located on the post, I could also press the period key, set the orientation to the 3D cursor. You can also set it up here. Select everything, rotate, and make the final adjustments. Then I want to extend this surface outwards. And there's a trick for that. Since there's a straight normal here pointing in that direction, I can take normal as the orientation. Because we still have the cursor selected, switch back to median point. That's the original setting, and I can do it like this until it almost connects. I would leave it like this. I'm considering making it a bit slimmer. Select everything. The normals don't quite fit anymore. So just scale it like this, and then manually extend it until it fits. Then switch back to global mode, lower it until it rests on the wood. I forgot to unwrap it again. Okay, so once again, I didn't manage to follow the correct order. Here we could add another bevel. And it looks pretty good. We see how practical it can be to pre-configure the material, making everything work almost automatically. Now, the material looks similar or mirrored because it is actually mirrored. We could apply the mirror modifier, but we need to do a small tweak because the object will be merged. Go to Merge and deactivate it, go back in, and make sure it's independent. Then exit to Object Mode, apply the modifier, and go back in. Select All, press P for Separate by Loose Parts. Now, separate objects have been created, each with a completely different texture and brightness level. It looks great. I'm considering brightening it up later. It seems a bit dark. You can always decide that separately for rendering. Okay, let's take a plank, duplicate it with Shift+D because we want to modify it. Place a frame around it, then duplicate it with Alt+D. Select both, duplicate with Shift+D, rotate it on Z by 90 degrees, and adjust it. I always say this in tutorials, but I mean it. If you're doing this for yourself, you might want to be more precise. Next, we'll work on the roof slope. Duplicate the plank with Shift+D on Z. Scale it a bit. Right-click, set origin to geometry to center it. Now we can rotate it more easily. Place it where you want the roof to be. I'll lower the roof later, but for orientation, I want to place it on this thing. Duplicate it with Alt+D, find a good slope. And now, let's be as precise as possible for the next step. Align it so that where the wood dips in the curve, it's the same for the next piece of wood. By doing this, we should be able to use Shift+R, and it looks good. Great. Go to the top view, look at the transparent view, and select the midpoint. Now select the woods and set the orientation to the 3D cursor. Duplicate with Alt+D, press R, Z, and 180 degrees. Now it's done. These are separate pieces of wood. Great. Select everything. And selection is a topic on its own. I've considered making a separate video for it. The easiest trick is to hold down the contour and deselect what we don't want. So, it's selected relatively quickly. If I had done it manually, it would have taken much longer. Lower it down, and I want the round logs to be visible, preferably from below. I see that the planks have gotten a bit thicker this time. We'll have to trim that next, and for that, we need to create a Boolean object. Add a cube, pull it out, and stretch it completely in width. Then select the edge, go back to Global, decide from the side view where it should be cut. Ideally in the middle of these outer supports. Add a mirror modifier, set the mirror object to our empty, activate clipping, and apply it. Now hide it. Select a plank, preferably one we want to cut, add a Boolean, and choose our Boolean object as the target. I see it's not quite right yet, but we'll fix that after we've cut the remaining planks. Select everything we need and deselect what we don't. From the coloring, we see that our plank is the active object. So, Ctrl-L, copy modifiers, and we're done. We could adjust the Boolean object as I had originally intended, but I assume the next layer of the side roof will cover it. Now let's take these left planks and the Boolean object, duplicate with Shift+D, rotate on Z by 90 degrees. Then we're halfway there. Adjust it to the tip and make sure it fits at the top. Lower it down to where you want it. The Boolean object can still be adjusted. Look at it from the side. Select the surface. It looks good at the top, but I'd like to pull it out a bit more at the bottom. Okay, great. In my case, it's uniform. If the terrace is wider than it is deep, the roof angle will also need to be adjusted separately. Hide it for now, and we're actually done with the whole object. Nice. I'll take a final look at the material because it looks a bit dark and a bit too rough. I'll brighten it up a bit here at the value, which controls our brightness. I think I like it better this way. Okay, let's look at it in render mode. I'll add an HDRI map. Set the film to transparent. Okay, so far so good. Then maybe also activate cycles. Now our Boolean object becomes visible. We can hide it with the H key. So it looks a bit better now. So far it looks quite charming. Let's take a look at the roof. It's not quite fitting yet. Let's see what the issue is. The wood material is set to only use displacement, and that's the problem here. As I said, these textures, I'll definitely link to the bump texture. It's absolutely fantastic, top quality. It's such high quality that it's actually too strong in this case. So go into the displacement settings and reduce it significantly, at least to 0.1. I've set it even flatter on my end, and now it looks a bit friendlier. but you can really use this for old wood, for high-quality wood. It's a very high-quality scan. And just like that, you have a sun terrace ready. You probably should make it a bit wider. I've made a smaller one here. I didn't stick to any specific measurements, but I wanted to show you how it works and how good of an idea it can be to prepare the material accordingly from the start. Pay attention to when you use Shift-D and when you use Alt+D. Use Shift-D when you want to copy the object independently, which is probably how most people generally use it. Use Alt+D when you want to copy the geometric properties as well. What we also did was copy the roof at the top. We also copied the Boolean object, ensuring that the modifiers or Boolean objects that were created for the second slope are the same duplicated Boolean objects. These are sometimes many small details that can speed up such tasks significantly. Okay, that was a quick run-through of a current project, referencing many small tricks to hopefully make your modeling and texturing a bit easier.